it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. When I was younger, I used to take such solace from my walks out into the forest on my own, just enjoying nature, breathing in the fresh air. But, well, there was always that slight air of menace, that unsurety as to what was around you, and how safe you actually were. As we will see in tonight's 3 stories. Now, we haven't done this for a while, so why don't you join me around the campfire? I've got some stories to tell, and they go something like this. Don't go to Wilhelm Bridge. There are wolves out here. By Red Hot Owl. It was around lunchtime when Noah and I arrived at the base of the hiking trail. He practically ejected himself from the car the moment we were no longer in motion. His enthusiasm was infectious. I retrieved our backpacks from the seat behind me and stepped outside as well. Noah had already run on ahead. He was standing among the wildflowers and tall grass, looking back with an expectant grin as if to say, "Keep up, nerd." His disheveled mop of bleached curls and oversized t-shirt swayed in the warm, dry breeze. The poor guy was built like a flagpole, but hell if I wasn't into it at the time. I rolled my eyes with an amused sigh and jogged up to him, then tossed him his backpack, which he almost fell over trying to catch. The year was 2014. We were fresh out of high school and were now blissfully enjoying the remainder of our summer. The plan was to make our way up to some landmark called Wilhelm Bridge. Noah's parents apparently owned a cabin there that they rarely used, the perfect weekend getaway for a pair of eager teenagers desperate for some privacy. Well, the day was a scorcher. The woods provided cover from the sun's immediate glare, but there was no escaping the heat itself. It made an otherwise easy trek feel as if we were embarking on a goddamn expedition. "Please tell me there's air conditioning up there, or at least a working fan," I complained, while wiping streams of sweat from my forehead. "Afraid not. I think Pops forgot his leaf blower last time we were there, though, if that helps," Noah answered with that trademark shit-eating grin of his, face glistening with perspiration. Very cute. The path tapered as we reached an impressive arrangement of boulders and rocks, likely the result of a landslide. I slowed my pace in order to retrieve the water bottle from the cluttered boughs of my backpack, which Noah interpreted as his cue to run ahead of me once more. He strolled up to one of the moss-covered slabs and then, for reasons best known to himself, determined that it was his duty to climb it. I shook my head and squeezed the plastic bottle, shooting a refreshing jet of lukewarm water directly into my mouth. "God, I wish that were me," Noah teased from the presumed safety of his perch. "It won't be if you keep it up. Let's go before I pass out." "Hey, just a sec." Well, I had no choice but to continue supervising this 18-year-old toddler as he hopped from surface to surface. Eventually, after clearing a rather precarious gap, he latched onto the side of a particularly large boulder and clambered up to its peak. There he triumphantly sat, feet swinging and eyes honed in on what must have been an impressive view of the park. "Well, you're lucky you're endearing." Noah stuck his tongue out in response, after which he went back to admiring the scenery. I conceded and plopped onto a nearby patch of flattened grass. Once seated, I squinted upwards at the looming evergreen, catching glimpses of the sky through its tangled mesh of needles and branches. Instead of taking the time to appreciate the untainted serenity of nature, however, for some reason I decided to broach the one topic that Noah hated discussing. "So, when do you think we should tell our folks, about us?" Predictably, his mood turned instantly sour. He threw his head back with a groan, clearly annoyed at me for reviving the subject. "Oh, come on, man." "No, I'm tired. I'm tired of sneaking around. I'm tired of lying. Tired of getting slapped away every time I try to hold your hand in public. My mom and pops aren't exactly progressive either, but I'm ready to do it if you are." "Yeah, but I'm not ready. I'll literally get disowned if they find out. You know that." "So what? You're fine with pretending like we're not a thing, like I don't exist?" "Oh, God. Can you not be a selfish asshole for 5 seconds? I told you I'm not ready. Noah's uncharacteristic but admittedly deserved outburst echoed across the pinewood forest. We both sat in tense silence for a good while, me with my knees pressed to my chest and him staring at his dangling feet. I chewed on my lips and averted my eyes in an effort to stave off the tears. Feelings of hurt, guilt, and regret came together to form a lump in my throat. I shouldn't have pressed him, I knew that. But at the same time, I was so sick and tired of having to conceal something as obtusely trivial as my own sexual preference, and all for the sake of complying with someone else's outdated ideology. I pried my raw lips, intending to utter an apology when, suddenly, a third voice chimed in. Don't mean to interrupt, but y'all doing all right over there? Well, it was nearby and I heard yelling. Surprised, I spun around and saw our anonymous spectator emerge from the surrounding woods. The first thing that stood out to me about the woman was her excessively long hair. It was white, peppered with the occasional strand of silver, and spilled past her knees in thick, heavy clumps. Tangled in it were various twigs, leaves of God knows what else, and making her look like some sort of ancient woodland spirit. After a rushed and clumsy descent, Noah rejoined me on our side of the clearing. Sorry if we startled you, ma'am. Just had a disagreement, all. He stumbled to explain, face red and burning with embarrassment. The old woman smiled and leaned against her walking stick. If I had to guess, I'd say that she was probably in her late 60s to early 70s, though her unkempt appearance made it difficult to tell for certain. Behind the curtains of hair, she wore a faded yellow dress that barely clung to a pair of weak shoulders. It looked to have once had a floral pattern, though it was difficult to tell for certain. It takes a heck of a lot more than that to startle this old hag. Haven't heard your voice before, though. Guessing you ain't locals. No, ma'am, promptly confirmed Noah. You can drop the formalities, boy. Name's Agnes. As the odd woman introduced herself, I noticed that she wasn't looking directly at us, but rather behind us, past us. It took me a moment, perhaps longer than it should have, to realize that she was visually impaired, if not outright blind. I couldn't help but wonder what someone in her condition was doing out here all alone. My boyfriend nudged me, hinting that it was my turn to say something. Well, pleasure to meet you, was all I could think to add. I purposefully omitted the courtesy of revealing our own names. Regardless of how harmless she appeared, I had a gut feeling that there was more to Agnes than what we were capable of readily perceiving. Perhaps sensing my distrust, she gave me a nod and made a point of moving the conversation along. Anywho, I'd be careful if I were y'all. The wolves will be out soon. Wolves? Here. I've heard of foxes and coyotes, but never any mentions of wolves, Noah asked with an understandable degree of skepticism. After all, our state certainly isn't known for its native wolf population. You're more likely to get mauled by a bear or get trampled by a deer than you are to encounter one outside of a zoo. Trust me, they're out here all right, and they sure as hell know you're here. My advice is to do what you gotta do and head back. These woods ain't as safe as they used to be. Noah and I looked at each other, mutely concurring that the woman was clearly not all there. The sun was still beating down on us relentlessly, and we were eager to get a move on, so we thanked Agnes for the warning and continued up the trail. Once there was considerable distance between us and her, I looked over my shoulder and saw glimpses of the crone-like figure disappearing back into the woods. There was no evidence of her ever having been there, apart from the residual feeling of unease in the pit of my stomach. After some more strenuous hiking, we finally arrived beneath Wilhelm Bridge, which, contrary to my expectations, wasn't an actual bridge, but rather a natural arch between two neighboring cliffsides, effectively forming a sort of gateway. The lodge was a stone's throw away from it, situated near the center of another large clearing. It's quite the picturesque little property, straight out of a brochure or a lifestyle magazine. I've always been more of a city dweller myself, but even I wasn't immune to its rural charm. We shared a cold shower together and spent the rest of the afternoon indoors. As the day progressed, the torrid temperatures dropped to mostly manageable levels. We decided to have a stroll around the homestead before packaging up and heading back. Turns out that sightseeing is significantly more enjoyable when you aren't on the verge of heat stroke. Who knew? We watched the once oppressive sun now dip behind the hills, dying in the sky in a palette of reds and oranges, which gradually gave way to an encroaching tide of greyish blue. "Holy sh!" Noah exclaimed, before cutting himself off. At first I thought that he was enthralled by the view, until I looked over and saw him veer off in a seemingly random direction. Here we go again, I thought. I didn't even attempt to match his pace. I just trailed behind while simulating enthusiasm. The stench of rotting meat assaulted my senses before I perceived the actual carcass. From a distance, it just looked like a mound of dirt. Then I noticed the antlers, and then the swarm of flies hovering above it. There, sprawled along a shallow ditch, was the half-eaten body of an adult deer. This is so gross. I stated the obvious through pinched nostrils. The creature's lower half was picked clean, and what scraps still remained were being feasted upon by hordes of wriggling maggots. Flaps of fermented flesh hung from exposed ribs, mired in a sickening miasma of decay. I think the weird old prune might have been telling the truth. I glanced down at Noah, who was squatting next to the dead animal's skull and poking it with a branch. He gingerly pushed the fur around its neck aside, revealing multiple bite marks. We, of course, weren't exactly qualified to determine whether the culprits had indeed been wolves, but the woman's ramblings didn't seem so far-fetched all of a sudden. "Let's go grab our shit and go." I pulled my boyfriend up to his feet, and we quickly made our way back to the lodge. Dusk was starting to settle. A peculiar sense of gloom hung in the air. As I pushed the front door open, I was greeted by an unexpected yet familiar visage. Blocking the cramped entryway was none other than Agnes herself. The sightless, scrawny woman stood there like a pale apparition, her form outlined by the dimness of the interior. "Lock your damn door," she remarked with a plain tone, and retreated further inside, ushering us both to follow. We did, albeit with a substantial degree of uncertainty. Our uninvited guest cautiously maneuvered between the furniture. I heard her joints pop as she found a suitable seat by the cold fireplace. Her hair brushed against the floorboards, her clouded eyes concealed beneath a waterfall of silver tresses. Mustering a modicum of courage, I said, "You shouldn't be here." Agnes proceeded to snort in amusement. She tapped her long, spindly fingers against the arm of her chair. "Funny, I was about to say the same thing." As if to emphasize her point, a choir of longing howls suddenly tore through the stillness outside. I felt the tension from before rise from my stomach to my chest, evolving into proper dread. Noah rushed to the nearest window while I just stood there, glaring at the hag, who in turn looked utterly aloof. "How about it, fellas? You all believe the weird old prune now?" "What do you want?" "Watch the tone, boy. I'm trying to keep you safe." "Keep us safe? What? Why? From what?" "From the goddamn wolves," she shouted, rising slightly from her chair with unexpected vigor. "Ain't you listening to what I've been telling you? I'm the first. They're here 'cause of me, and I don't want any more fools dying 'cause of some old grudge." "Chill, lady. What the hell are you—" All of a sudden there was a thump, closely followed by a rattle. Noah slowly withdrew from the window. His expression was a blend between complete bewilderment and fear, the kind of fear that debilitates you and leaves you unsure whether you're meant to flee or hold your ground. As I peeked over his shoulder, I noticed that the glass was still shaking, as if someone had slapped it before running away. I gently squeezed past my terror-stricken boyfriend, walked up to it and leaned in. Just as I was about to announce that there was nobody out there, a human fist collided with the pane, this time causing it to explode. Shards scattered like shrapnel. Reaching in, the meaty hand wrapped around my throat and pulled me towards the window, dragging my entire body through it, before dumping me onto the wooden porch outside. Shattered glass crunched beneath me as I landed. I rolled onto my hands and knees, straining to produce a cough. Noah shrieked in the background. His voice was quickly drowned out, though, by a cacophony of barks and ravenous growls. I had to get to him. I had to. Ignoring the bitter taste of blood in my mouth, I looked up at my assailant. Standing over me was the figure of a man, a large, corpulent man, with arms twice the size of mine and a bloated gut to match. There was a disgusting sheen of filth covering the entirety of his naked body, and consequently suffocating the inflamed sores that occupied its various greasy crevices. The most grotesque feature of them all, however, was undoubtedly the face. His nose was pressed against his skull and his lips were peeled back, revealing blackish gums that had curved, dog-like canines protruding from them. Images of the bite marks around the dead deer's neck flashed briefly before my eyes. The beast man unhinged his oversized jaw and snapped at the air in front of me, drool seeping from beneath his carnivorous teeth. I wanted to crawl away, but as soon as I reached the edge of the platform, I realized that there was nowhere left to go. Multiple sets of hungry eyes stared back at me. There was an entire pack of those freakish amalgamations surrounding the lodge, each more inhuman than the last. I saw a tall woman whose deformed and disproportionately long limbs allowed her to exclusively walk on all fours. Then there was a man with sharp ears and half his body covered in fur. Behind them both was something that could hardly be categorized as a person, possessing claws and a fleshy, languid appendage that vaguely resembled a tail. Well, I'd compare them to animals, but that would imply a degree of inculpability. They weren't driven by simple instincts. There was intent behind their viciousness, and their wretched forms only reflected it. There was a wet snarl in my ear, followed by a sensation of weightlessness, before I was slammed back down against the unforgiving red wood. The air was knocked out of my lungs. I would have cried in agony if I could. The mutant crowd of spectators jumped with sadistic excitement. Some chanted garbled phrases that were impossible to decipher over the ringing in my skull. Others just yapped and howled, encouraging my abuse. Using my elbows, I desperately tried to pull myself forth, only to be picked up for a third and final time. The hulking mass of greasy flesh lifted me above his head, and once again savagely bounced my limp body off the wooden deck. Something audibly snapped. I couldn't tell whether it was a loose board or one of my ribs. Helpless and gasping, I lay there among the broken glass. The world kept fading in and out. Darkness occupied the corners of my waning vision and, in spite of my efforts to stave it off, to remain conscious, it eventually swallowed everything, including me. I was standing beneath Wilhelm Bridge. The trees around me bore shades of autumn, and the air smelled of rain. Across from me, bathed in the shadow of the rocky archway, was a young girl. Her black hair was tied in long braids that had small charms interwoven into them. Her dark, narrow eyes glared at me spitefully, her lips curled in disdain. I noticed that she kept tugging on the hem of her bright yellow dress, which was dotted with flowery motifs and looked slightly too big for her. She was trying to conceal the bump inside her stomach. Given her age, the implications of her pregnancy were disconcerting to say the least, especially coupled with the clear signs of abuse, like the purple ring of bruises around her neck. She bent over, picked a tiny rock off the ground and threw it at me. It bounced against my chest, landing squarely at my feet. Tears of hatred and frustration rolled down her face. The young girl grabbed the fabric around her swollen belly, clenching it in her fist. Suddenly a bitter smile tore through her face. "You know what? I think I'll call her." Every word was laden with venom and vengeful malice. Agnes. I was stuck in the role of a passive observer, watching through someone else's eyes as dark red bubbles began to appear around corners of her grin. Something was trying to crawl its way out of her. She lurched back, pressed her palms to her stomach and, after what felt like hours of painful retching, a long bony arm burst forth from her mouth. The ghastly appendage flailed aimlessly before digging its beast-like claws into the host's lower jaw and stretching it past its limit, leaving ample room for another set of fingers to emerge, and then a wolfish skull, and then a torso, and then a leg. My senses were polluted by the familiar stench of rot. I looked down. In place of the pebble that was previously thrown at me was the decaying head of a deer. Its lolled tongue began to twitch. It turned its sunken, dead eyes up at me and said, Marcus, for God's sake, please wake up." My eyes shot open. I tried to sit up, but a sharp ache in my ribs forced me to reconsider. I was back on that porch, only now I had Noah kneeling by my side. I heard him breathe a tense sigh, presumably relieved to see me conscious again. He hastily brushed some of the glass off of me, and before I could ask him what was going on, I was already being pulled to my feet. The pain spread, radiating through my upper body, but I did my best to block it out. Though my mind was still rattled, Noah's trembling tone was enough to convey a sense of urgency. "Come on, get up. We gotta go." What? As I reluctantly guided my eyes away from Noah's pleading expression and towards the clearing, I was greeted by a sight that was terrifying as it was surreal. Blood flowed freely from the recently decapitated torsos, dyeing the grass beneath them crimson. There were limbs and other minced body parts scattered haphazardly about. Guts hung from branches like some sort of twisted Christmas display, with a disembodied shell lying lifeless beneath it, features frozen in a mute scream of agony. A layer of gore was splattered across every conceivable surface, but it was the imposing figure at the center of the hellscape that truly made me question my sanity. It stood as tall as the trees, a gangling bipedal sculpture of muscle and protruding bone. Its skin was stretched so tightly that I could see the individual vertebrae shifting in its back. It was hairless apart from the pale mane of blood-stained fur dangling from its skull, mercifully obscuring its true visage. Only its lupine muzzle stuck out from between the strands, aligned with rows of jagged, interlocking teeth that couldn't even fit inside its own mouth. The worst part was that, as unfathomably monstrous as it was, there was still something about it that I recognized, an underlying tragic element that eluded description. I watched the creature effortlessly pick up one of the lifeless bodies left bleeding on the ground. Its long fingers wrapped around the lesser abomination's dripping remains and lifted them up to its gaping jaws. The crunch that followed finally caused me to avert my eyes. I sought comfort against Noah's chest, pressing my face against it. "Can't be real. This can't be real," I whimpered. "We have to go," my boyfriend repeated, feigning courage as best he could. He threw my arm over his shoulders and led us away from the lodge. I could feel his rapid breathing on my cheek, his eyes darting wildly in search of the trail back. As evening approached, we pulled out our phones and used them to illuminate the path ahead. A pair of artificial lights, shining in unison, kept the encroaching darkness at bay, if only temporarily. If not for the context, it could have been quite poetic. "What the hell happened back there?" I finally asked, still wincing. For a while there was no answer, only the rustling of leaves. "Agnes, she told me to grab you and make a run for it, and that she'll hold those freaks off. Then she just ran out the door and, oh man, I don't know." Noah shook his head, as if trying to erase or at least suppress that particular memory. When that didn't work, he went on, growing more frantic with each sentence. "She started changing?" He phrased it almost like a question, like he didn't fully trust his own recollection. He piled onto her, tried to hold her down, but there was no point. She ripped through them like a goddamn chainsaw, and the more it ate, the more it grew, and... His chin trembled. His attempt at a stoic expression crumbled away, revealing glimpses of the traumatized teenager hiding behind it. "God, please tell me you saw that thing too. Please tell me it wasn't all in my head." "It's okay, I saw it too," I assured him, in the most comforting tone I could muster, though, in truth, a part of me still held out hope that this was all a cruel dream. One by one, stars twinkled into existence. Wilhelm Bridge became a distant silhouette against the dimming sky, and soon dipped behind the forest entirely, as if it never existed. The blood loss from my various cuts, coupled with the intermittent stabs of pain, rendered each step a challenge, but we eventually made our way back to the car. Noah ended up driving me to the nearest walk-in clinic, which thankfully wasn't very far. It turns out I was right about the broken rib. I was apparently quite lucky that it didn't puncture a lung. It took half a year, but I eventually made a full recovery, save for a few unsightly scars. When questioned, we opted for a more believable version of events, explaining that we were attacked by a group of crazy hillbillies out in the woods, which is the same version we later gave to our parents. Lying proved to be the right call, since the local sheriff's department apparently found nothing out of the ordinary when they went up there to survey the scene. No obscene amounts of gore, no half-eaten mutant corpses, no nothing. Though I suspect that it would have been immediately covered up even if they did. Regardless, I won't be planning any trips to Wilhelm Bridge in the foreseeable future. I've mostly kept to my therapist's advice and never really gone down the proverbial rabbit hole. Perhaps digging into the site's history might yield some context to the horrors we experienced that day, but I feel like some things are best left forgotten to time. In fact, consider this a parting letter to the last 25 years of my life. Noah and I are finally getting married in January, after which we'll be planning a permanent move to Pennsylvania. The cliché thing to do will be to warn you against trying to find the actual landmark I may or may not have renamed to Wilhelm Bridge for the purposes of this story. But we all know how that usually goes. If you do end up finding it, however, do me a favor. If you see an old woman with long white hair and a yellow dress, tell her I said thanks. The Moose Man by Feisty Environment.
What if you get attacked? What if you catch a disease? What if you... I silenced my childhood friend, and, at the time, high school sweetheart Brian, with a finger over the mouth. Brian was a protective boyfriend, occasionally to an annoying extent. Despite this, I loved spending time with him. I suppose the fact we'd known each other since 3rd grade helped out. It's only 3 nights. I'll be back before Christmas. Besides, I have my knife, and my dad's bringing a rifle. I would pay to see a wolf try to handle the power of a .22. I wasn't. We were suddenly cast into darkness by the gas-powered lamp which had previously lit up the inside of our clubhouse going out. I sighed and moved the piece of plywood which acted as the door. Sunlight flooded the walls and floor, and we both gave a sharp inhale at the assault on our eyes. I exhaled as my eyes adjusted to the outside, and I got up to leave. Our clubhouse was constructed within an old gravel pit, which was used as a trash storage by the nearby supermarket and the construction crew which built it. The high mountains of grey rocks were surrounded and covered by empty boxes, spare 2x4s, and sheets of corrugated tin and plywood alike. We'd assembled our house over the span of 3 days. 2 2x4s had been driven into the sides of the gravel mountains, which created a short canyon near the back. Plywood and metal was used for the wall in which we had installed our door, as well as the roof. An old nail gun was stashed in one corner, in case a drunk or hobo wandered in while we were there. It only had enough gas to fire a few shots, but we only had 3 nails, so it didn't matter. A tarp had been used for insulation, as well as a way to keep the sunlight from leaking in. We'd used one of my dad's old gas-powered camping lamps to light it up. A lamp which was now out of fuel. Brian followed me out of the clubhouse, giving a slight grunt as he moved the plywood door back in its place. I pecked him on the cheek as we said our goodbyes, and we rode in separate directions on our bikes. One day, and a 4.5-hour drive later, we were at the back of the campground. The park ranger gave us our favourites, a 20 years of membership reward. The site was larger than the rest, and had a few layers of seclusion provided by the verdant July pines. I was hunting around for rocks to use as a fire ring, and my dad was assembling his tent with the effortless perfection of an Eagle Scout. The birds chirped, and something large, an elk or maybe a moose, crashed around in the trees just out of sight. That night, as we sat around the crackling flames, I found myself watching the tree line. The great pines seemed darker than usual, their shadows more pronounced. In fact, their shadows seemed to swallow the forest entirely, blocking sight for anything more than 5 feet in. Movement. It was fast, less than a second long, but whatever had moved, it was huge. It looked like a man, but it was almost 8 feet high. Its arms were long, and what I can only describe as lumpy, like twisted tree limbs come to life. Its back legs were animalistic, and curved back before ending in long, curved talons, like a combination between wolf and eagle. Its hands were almost human, but its claws were almost perfectly straight. They reminded me of the paper claws you would fold in 4th grade and pretend to be some fearsome beast come recess. But this was no man in costume. In one hand, it clutched a deer by its neck. The creature was dead, and scarlet trails slithered down the obsidian claws. The kill was only barely touching the floor. What struck me most about the thing was its face. It was covered in a great mask. It reminded me of one of those cow skulls that you see in every Western movie, but it was elongated and far too thin. Instead of curved, thick horns, there were wide antlers. They ended in sharp points, which were coated in a brownish-red substance that trickled down like paint. Hey, you all right? I split my mind from the trance I'd developed and pulled the sausage, now a blackened crisp likened to a cattail, from the fire. I inspected it, then chucked it into the fire. I grabbed a new one and impaled it on my stick before returning it to the fire. My dad took a bite out of his. Oh, you look like you've seen a dead body. I pondered this before responding with, yeah, I'm fine. Just a wolf or something. You want me to take a few warning shots? My dad asked with a chuckle, before drawing out the long rifle from the other side of the log. No way. I'd rather not get kicked out on our first night. My dad took another bite from his sausage. I withdrew mine from the fire and loaded it into a bun before adding a stripe of hot sauce. I looked back to the trees. Whatever I'd seen there was gone. How very naive of me. I woke up at, according to my watch, 2:27 a.m. in my one-person tent 40 feet away from my father and 30 from the picnic table which held our gun. In its case, my dad isn't a moron. I sat up in my sleeping bag, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. My toes, despite the 20-degree sleeping bag, were freezing. I wrapped my hand around them, encased in their wool socks, while I tried to figure out why I'd woken up in the first place. The interior of my tent was warm enough to keep me asleep. The crickets were a sound I was used to as a Colorado native. I finally realized the second set of breathing 5 minutes after I woke up. I couldn't imagine how I'd missed it. It was extremely heavy, but it wasn't my dad. He snored, but he didn't snore that loud. It was likely an elk. I figured they were creatures of the night, and if it were a wolf, I could try to stun it with my flashlight and yell for my dad to get the gun. If it was some pervert who'd found his way to me, then I'd get the gun and deal with the problem myself. My fingers found the cold ocean blue steel body of my flashlight. My thumb pressed against the nylon-covered button on the back. I got ready to yell, and then swung. The moment my light turned on, the tent was flooded with a synthetic yellow light from the flashlight. I scrunched my eyes together and I heard who, or whatever was outside, hiss in surprise and pain. My eyes adjusted to the light, and I got a good look at the silhouette of my nighttime visitor. Oof, I nearly relieved myself when I saw it. The antlers extended wider than my light allowed, but the sharp, spear-like points were all too familiar. I saw the small, half-centimeter-high ridge that protruded down the skull-like mask of it. The arms were great bowels come to life in the form of powerful arms, and the front claws were almost perfectly straight, but had sharp triangular points, an almost exact copy of the origami claws of my youth. One of its hands covered its eyes to block the sunlight. I let out a trembling breath, hoping, praying to every single deity I could imagine, Odin, Ra, God, even the driving force beyond cosmology, that whatever was near to my tent would retreat back to the shadowy tree line. It put down its hand, and I gave a single, high-pitched scream at what I saw. The dark silhouette of the head and body was blocking the light, but the eyes were non-existent. 2 golden circles in the mask which let the night through. Its head cocked to one side, and then, as if I were dreaming, it repeated the sound. It was like I'd heard a recording played back to me underwater. As it repeated my terrified grasp, the eyes flickered, as if they suddenly filled with smoke. From far away, there came footsteps. The creature turned its head towards my father, then got up. The shadow of mangy fur surrounding its lower legs came into view. Then it stalked off towards the trees. No less than a minute later, someone else was outside my tent. My dad unzipped the tent flap and peered inside. Dark shadow supported his eyes, which looked concerned. You okay? Thought I heard screaming. I'm fine. Just a nightmare is all. His face turned from concern to empathy. If you want to sleep in my tent, I guess I can spare some space. No, it's fine. I just want to sleep. My dad ran a hand through his beard, then closed the tent flap. I shut off my flashlight and squirmed down into my sleeping bag. I was re-enveloped in the tendrils of sleep before 2:45. I woke up to the scent of campfire-cooked pancakes, and the voices of 2 men, as well as my father, engaged in conversation. I yawned and rubbed my eyes. I straightened my hair using my pillow and pulled on a pair of pajama pants as well as a tank top. I slipped my feet into my flip-flops and crawled out of the tent. My dad was speaking to 2 park rangers. One of them said something, and my dad motioned to the rifle, making another unintelligible comment. The ranger looked at it, then looked to the other ranger, who shook his head. The first ranger said something to my dad and asked a question in turn. Nobody had noticed yet that I was here. I caught only a few lines of the conversation. So, you're sure you saw nothing? The first ranger asked. Yeah, maybe a deer and a few campers, but nobody else, my dad said. Any nighttime occurrences? Nightmares? Strange visions? Sudden blackouts? The second ranger responded. Well, my daughter had one last night. She had her flashlight on and everything. She seemed freaked out. Face was pale. When did this happen? The first ranger questioned, apprehensive. They each had one hand hovering over their service pistols. I don't know. 2:30 maybe? Hey, Dad. I smelled pancakes. The rangers were at ease after this comment, and my dad looked over, startled. Good morning, eh? These rangers wanted to know if you saw anything last night. Well, there was the nightmare. Other than that, just you. Hey, did we bring syrup this time? I neglected to mention the thing which I had nicknamed the Moose Man, out of fear for the park ranger's actions, and if the moose man had some way to hear everything I said. I poured syrup over the yellow cakes, took a bite with my plastic fork. The rangers smiled and said their goodbyes to me and my dad. One of them muttered something to my dad. His face fell. He placed another log on the fire and then told me to watch it while he relieved himself. I looked down to the fire, poking at it with a stick I'd used to cook the sausage last night. I figured it would make an effective spear if the moose man returned. Then I remembered our rifle. I turned around to run a finger down the cool wooden body, but it wasn't there. I looked up to my dad, and my suspicions were confirmed. My dad had walked into the tree line. Slung over his shoulder was the rifle. My dad returned a few minutes later, rifle still on his shoulder. I'd asked him why he'd taken it with him. Well, there were some giant tracks outside of your tent when I woke up this morning. Looked like they come from a wolf the size of a bear. Didn't want to get jumped, so I brought the gun. Hope I didn't scare you. Now, when people lie, they always do something. They talk animatedly with their hands. They look down. They use and more often. For my dad, well, he runs his hand through his beard. He did this as he gave his answer, and then quickly set the rifle back down on the table. He poured more batter into the pan, and I looked at the rifle. The safety was off. The world was normal up until that night. We had ham and barbecue sauce sandwiches for lunch, the wonders of camping food, and campfire cooked hot dogs for dinner. Yes, again. The key difference was that this time, my dad and I brought out an old Dutch oven. Dutchy peach pie was a camping tradition in our family. 1 can of peaches with syrup, sandwiched between the layers of flaky crust and topped with powdered sugar. It was delicious if done right, but doing it right took almost 3 hours. By the time we were finished, it was almost midnight. My dad had just lifted the top of the Dutch oven off to check the pie when we heard something that chilled us to the bone. Imagine a wooden creak sound, but almost twice as high-pitched and 10 times as loud. The birds in the trees flew to the sky, cawing, hooting, and twittering as they flapped away. The crickets and frogs were silent. I wouldn't be surprised if the whole campsite was awoken by the loud, screeching rumble. I looked at my dad, who was watching me. "What the hell?" I asked, dumbfounded. My dad's head snapped around. Coming from the thin layer of trees that separated us from the rest of the campsite was the unmistakable sound of twigs and leaves crunching beneath feet. I grabbed my knife, and my dad pointed the rifle towards the shrubbery, which was violently gyrating back and forth. My dad's finger was curled around the trigger, ready to send a shot into whatever was going to burst forth at any moment. "Hey, stay behind me." The park ranger, who wasn't one of the first two, came forth from the trees. My dad lowered the rifle, and I placed my knife back on the table. The ranger stumbled over a tree root and looked around. In one hand he held a flashlight, which was off. In the other, a giant silver revolver. "You guys the only ones here?" he yelled out. Yeah, just me and my daughter." The ranger stepped forward. He didn't put his gun away. "You see anything strange? Any bones, antlers, large creatures?" "No, nothing since..." The bush line twitched near my tent. It was a small movement. The ranger pointed the gun and flashlight at it and turned the light on. It was a raccoon. The creature pawed around at the ground, picking up and eating small items we couldn't see. It zigzagged back and forth, sometimes returning whatever he picked up to the dirt. "Station, this is 17. Raccoon near 1 tent. No sign of 2 or Beta. I'll call in with any update. The ranger shone his light back to the raccoon. It was gone, but there was something on the ground in front of my tent. The ranger walked forward to it and lifted it up. I could barely make out what it was, but it was curvy and human-shaped. The ranger looked at it for a few seconds, then turned around and looked toward me. He looked at the thing's back. His eyes widened. He yelled into his radio and then ran back towards me, his gun trained on the trees. He got back to us and turned towards me. "Ma'am, did you see anyone other than your father tonight?" "No. Why?" "Sir," the ranger said, turning towards my dad, "if you or your daughter have seen anything, and I mean anything, then you have to let me know, okay?" The solemn look on his face said it all. I said nothing. That night, despite the pie, a slice of which the ranger politely declined, was the single, unequivocally worst night of my life. It started around 1:30 a.m., a series of long, heavy footfalls, like snow crunching beneath the ground. Then I heard the breathing. When I was 5 years old, we lived in a house which had one of those old furnaces, the ones which could roar like a strange tone, with the occasional click. That furnace terrified me. The breathing I heard reminded me of this furnace. I heard the unmistakable creak of wood, followed by the soft thump of something hitting leaves and twigs outside my tent. The breathing slowed. Then I heard the soft clink of metal on metal. My hand shot out, grabbing my flashlight from the bag, then shifting my shirt to the side, drawing my knife. It flipped open with a click that was music to my ears. I leaned forward, preparing to launch myself. If it was who I think it was, I would drive the blade into one of the long nose slits of that horrible mask. The tent flap slowly unzipped. With a blood-curdling scream, I flew forward, but the moose man was ready for me. He folded to one side, and I dropped into the dirt. I whirled around, but the moose man was on top of me. He was surprisingly heavy. The mask was even larger up close. I could have reached out and not even got my fingers around the tip of the antlers. He let out another one of those ripping screams we'd heard from earlier that night. I was overcome with terror. Then I remembered my knife. I looked to one side. The handle was a few inches away from my fingers. I struggled to reach it, but the moose man was keeping me in place. It placed a hand on my right shoulder. The claws acted as a cage for my arm. It reached its other hand up, ready to strike. I lunged sideways, wrapping my hand around my knife. I thrust it forward, straight into where the eye should have been. The blade hit what felt like stone. The beast cried out and slammed its hand down to where my head had been a second earlier. I slipped downward. I slammed my elbow into the knee of the thing. It stumbled down, then reared up to its full height. I made a dash for my drop knife. The beast reached up to his mask and pulled. I only caught a glimpse of what was under its mask. I was overcome with an extreme wave of nausea. I closed my eyes and looked away. From somewhere else, someone, my father, yelled. 2 gunshots cracked the night. I heard a second voice, one who I presumed to be a park ranger, yelling something out. Another volley of gunshots rang through the air. The beast roared its furnace-like roar. There were 3 heavy footfalls, then the unmistakable sound of someone dropping. At least 6 rushed footsteps approached. More gunfire. The beast roared and scampered away. The trees returned to normal, and the gunshots stopped. Someone grabbed me by the shoulders. I shrieked and kicked my dad in the shin. He gave a heaving groan. Someone else grabbed my legs, and a second man took my arms. I looked at the 2 rangers' faces, both plastered with fear. My breathing slowed, my tears stopped, and the rangers relaxed. It took almost 2 hours for me to tell my story. Another 1.5 for my dad to tell his. We were both held in the Rangers Station jail, under guard by a huge man with a gun to match. By the time everything was figured out, the other campers were cooking on the fire, talking about all the sounds that they'd heard. Site 2 was empty. A great plastic wall had been erected around it, but it didn't do much to hide it from view. I saw the silhouette of a great statue, like the one the ranger had found near my tent. This one was almost as tall as the Moose Man himself, and there was the shredded shadow of the tent behind it. Before I could even inquire about it, a ranger saw me staring and escorted us back to our site. We were back home by lunchtime. We were told to tell our acquaintances that the campsite had been closed early due to a small fire nearby. It would not likely do any damage, but hey, better safe than sorry. As far as I can tell, nobody knows about the Moose Man. I've tried to forget the whole thing, and hope that writing this story helps with that. Because, well, every few weeks, I have this nightmare. I'm running through the woods, and I can hear something behind me. It is large and fast. I trip over the wall, and I turn around to see the Moose Man thundering towards me. It stops when I can see his mask. I wake up, and I see the shape burned into my vision. I love the Colorado Rockies. The Dismal Moor by Michael Page. Fuck you! Nathan Keene screamed at his grandmother. Her quivering lips stiffened and sucked in a gasp. The widening sclera of her aged vision looked as though they'd pop out of her skull. With all the strength his little hands could summon, Nathan slammed the door behind him. He could hear Nana calling his name as Gramps returned to his study with mumbled curses. The seething 10-year-old cut through the neighbor's backyard. He stomped over their vegetable garden and hopped over the small chain-link fence to the street. One of the diamond-shaped wires slipped across his palm and opened a bleeding slit. The sting that followed was fierce, but otherwise ignored by his screaming thoughts. He made his way past Oak Road and crossed the street with his eyes to the asphalt. Gramps' words rattled inside of him, acting as crazy as his father. An orange Camry deafened him with its blaring horn, followed by an angry woman shouting, "Use both eyes, punk!" Nathan raised a miniature yet powerful middle finger to the driver's bumper. Screw everyone, he thought. Screw everyone in the world. This is where his mother left him with his grandparents, shoved in Leon County's Fat Rolls, Tallahassee. Nana said she needed a mommy break from it all. Of course, after all the shouting, all the sleepless nights, she needed a mommy break. So, here he was, pawned off like the forgotten luggage from an airport's baggage carousel. She was out there enjoying the vintage of life. She was out there soaking in the laughing sun. She was out there, happier without him, happier without Dad. Bitter tears pooled within the purple ring that encircled his bruised eye. A memento he received last week. The shiner was given to him by Marcus Myhol, an 8th grader in his neighborhood with the athletic build and looks of Popeye's Bluto. Marcus spent his afternoons waiting for the school bus to round the corner, alongside a misfit posse of skinny jeans and sagging asses. Once that yellow hinged door folded open, he was a lion, deciding which prey had the weakest windpipe. It made him feel alive, as though the bus were an enormous capsule filled with a limitless antidepressant. But on the day he mistook Nathan Keene for a wounded gazelle, the dosage fought back. Sidewalks led Nathan to the gated entrance to Hollow Park, a mature chunk of caustic land amidst many homes in the community. Beneath its underlain layer of soft rock were subterranean drainage systems that formed caves. The landscape was pockmarked with sinkholes, dry and wet, shallow and deep. His shoes scuffed the grit that permeated the sloping path. He felt happier here, hidden beneath the groves that kept the May heat from beating on him. Time felt elusive, and life felt fair. Nobody could hurt him here. He crossed the small bridge Dad once tripped over and peered into the soft stream. This was, once, their park. Every other spring, they'd always come back here while visiting his grandparents. The memories felt pleasant at first, but soon started to sting again. Those were the nights when he could sleep, before the dreams became clots of empty spaces. Every night, accelerating and expanding into a gash of dark energy like a galaxy without stars. No oxygen, no solid ground to tread, only the titanic darkness. Hungry darkness that fed on his house, his room, his father, until everything inevitably disappeared. Yes, the park was where he'd disappear as well. Temporarily, of course. It wouldn't be difficult for everyone to guess where he'd run off to. Soon enough they'd all come running, sorry for what they'd put him through. Gramps would apologize for being an asshole. Nana would make her ambrosia pudding. Mom would see that her son wasn't baggage. Dad would come back home. His plan was flawless. Just to the right of him, near the restrooms, the pathway he was on led guests to the park's main loop, the sinkhole trail. Any visitor could look straight down the throat-like chutes and see an array of colored pools. You could watch rushing water disappear and then pop up again in a river rise. Wooden posts announced your arrival at each sink, as well as its given name. The surrounding trees were marked with green blazes that guided hikers to each site. Nathan scratched his head and pondered. Where could he wait it out? The painted blazes would lead him down a flight of stairs towards Shriveled Sink. Just beyond there, the trail rose up to an overlook of Spinner Sink. He could then slide down the path and circle left to Virtue Springs. Then an idea struck him like a freight train. With the luscious green organs of Hollow Park was a body of water separated from the collective path. A gaping sinkhole called the Dismal Moor. Hidden beneath its dirty black water is a pit that plummets deep into the earth. Deep, lightless catacombs branch out for miles and also connect to Virtue Springs. There was his answer. The pay dirt he needed. He knew exactly where to find it, too. On occasions when his mother didn't join them, he and his father wandered off the trail to see the sinkhole for themselves. They weren't overly impressed by the wide drink of water, but his father enjoyed humoring the title. Mom disagreed with him. Nathan recalled all the times Nana warned him to steer clear of the Dismal Moor. path leads you away from that sinkhole because it isn't safe. Children, especially you, should never play near there. The soil is very loose and may collapse beneath your feet. It is not a good place for kids to be. This was the only way he could make his mother understand. Really understand. He wanted the weight of his world to compress her shoulders. He wanted the hot glowing embers that burnt his heart to singe hers. He wanted her to watch the swelling crevasse of empty space to gouge her dreams every night. Nathan brushed away an escaping tear with his knuckles. He discreetly followed the green blazes to the set of steps. They lowered into a depression with a wooden post that read in large, white letters, "Shriveled Sink." He crossed the observation deck that provided a clear vertical view down a slender chimney of sloshing brown water. He idly wondered if tossing in a coin would earn him a wish. The trail climbed out of the crater and began its curvature towards Spinner Sink. His brown eyes traced along the sides until he found the cutaway that his father had discovered. He paced his sneakers over the brushes of wiregrass that tickled his legs. Ahead of him was the oval rock they both pissed on once. Not too much farther past that were the magnolia trees that resembled his teacher's hairdo. Before long, he arrived. The sinkhole stretched 40 meters, with a cascade of plants growing along its bowl-shaped walls. A bent cypress tree loomed over the edge he stood on. Its branches curled like puppet fingers over the black water. Dead leaves voyaged across the surface. Nathan wrapped his fingers around the brown-grey bark and slid cautiously down the shallow slope. Dirt caked into his rubber soles and smeared over the white laces. A few rocks were dislodged and sent bouncing into the pond, falling forever beneath the dark. He stopped himself just a few inches from the more stilled blackness and sat into the soil. "Crazy," Gramps had shouted, acting as crazy as his father. The thoughts bounced, bent, and shattered as though his brain were a small blender. Then he could just unplug it for a while. That would be nice. Almost too nice. He clasped a handful of wet pebbles encrusted with dirt and skidded them across the water. White ripples pulsed over one another in seams. "Who are you?" a voice asked, abruptly. Nathan sprung up and nearly slipped feet first into the sinkhole. The question wasn't demandingly spit out by an adult. It was calm and spoken with childlike curiosity. His brown eyes combed the pit's soil-lined walls to the surrounding rim. Was he followed here? No. Nobody was there. Until he looked down. A face stared up at him, bobbing out of the black water. Nathan froze. It looked like a boy's face. His skin was moon-white with grime caked around the chin and ear tips. Strands of his short blonde hair swayed and danced beneath the surface. The water was too shady to spy any white neck or flowing clothes below him. He looked like a pale island with closed lips carved in the dry land. The face then blinked and slid its blue bell eyes to their corners, facing him. "Are you crying?" Nathan wiped his eyes and picked up his nerves into an unmoved bravado. "No," he scoffed. "You aren't supposed to swim in there." The boy's soaked eyebrows perked. "But I swim here all the time. Isn't so bad to me." His eyelids wilted like partially closed curtains, as though he were about to suck in a heavy yawn. "Why are your cheeks red and your eyes puffy? One of them's black, too." Nathan grinded his teeth and now felt self-conscious. This kid had some nerve showing up uninvited and now examining him. Was he on trial or something? I wasn't crying. What do you care? I do care. Why? We've never met before. Nathan's stare became slits. Good point. I'm James. The face winded its lips into a misshapen smile. Waiting for someone? Nathan scowled inwardly. The boy named James was strange, weird-looking and very nosy. Yet behind that oddball persona was a pleasant voice, which baffled him the most. My mum left me here. I don't know for how long, maybe forever. The thoughts carried air pockets through him that threatened to rupture with anger. Oh, James's inquisitive look melted. My parents left me here too. A new weight carried his voice. Curiosity veered Nathan back to those blue eyes. Why? He asked. They went away without me. I thought we were happy. But things always change. James heaved a gloomy breath. The world ends with change, doesn't it? In that instance, Nathan didn't feel alone. In the most ironic of all places. His inner wrath simmered to a mild boil. Yes, the oddball was right. Change meant the finale of everything. Adults did it all the time, because they can't hear it. The cries tugging at their pants from the floor. All that matters is them, and only them. He couldn't peg a word for what he was feeling, but an adult would have called it empathy. I'm Nathan. James's sinking expression was reanimated. It's a pleasure to meet you, Nathan. Parents treat us all the same, don't they? Nathan nodded. Then we Lost Boys should stick together, right? Nathan nodded. Pallid hand rose to the surface with wrinkled fingertips that presented themselves. What do you say we shake on it? He offered. Nathan leaned over the pond and extended his arm to reach. The hand snapped forward and seized him. James's smile withered. Thick pain whirled from his wrist and twisted like an Indian burn. The grip plunged his hand into the black water. A paralyzing chill kissed his cut palm, as though his veins were becoming icicles. In his mind he yelled, "Let me go!" But his voice box shriveled. His free hand snatched wildly in the air for anything solid enough to cling to. Freezing pain was prodding his submerged arm and climbing higher. This had to be a prank, a sick prank that a weird boy played on all strangers. His roaming fingers caught something coarse and flaky. The drooping tree. He bent and dug his nails into the bark. With a good yank, he managed to wrench his arm out of the murk. Then he saw what had hold of him and felt his mind derail. What followed out was a cluster of branch-like tentacles noosed around his arm. They resembled vines that were dripping and dead. The rotten smell from their smooth, gluey membranes induced vomit. Mental paralysis set in. His sanity untethered and drifted to freedom, somewhere far away from this. The face that jutted from the abyssal water was no longer James. Its milky skin sank to bluish green, with prominent flabby bruises. Both bluebell irises were engulfed by pupils that were dilating like spilled ink. "What's the matter, Nathan?" It crooned from receding lips and deformed teeth. I thought you were a lost boy. No, it wasn't a voice at all. Just sputters and gurgles from water-logged lungs. Nathan's fingers slipped from the calloused grooves. The raw tentacles dragged him towards the watery fissure. His sneakers dug into the earth to cement himself from the sticky knot's unrelenting pull. The black jelly that had once been its eyes drained into their sockets. The bruised bags of flesh slumped and split apart, releasing putrid bile. Green ichor infused with the black water and floated atop its surface like oil streaks. The weak skin further dissolved into greenish foam that reached the sinkhole's rims. Its ears, nose, cheeks, and lips all became liquefied mass to feed the cesspool. But the voice did not melt away. It rang like a siren from the discolored skull's splintered fibers. Come inside. The loneliness is over and never coming back. I'm calling for you. We're all calling for you. Nathan. 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 A pain was being ignited in Nathan's shoulder. With every violent jerk and tug, the internal fire outspread. It couldn't be contained. Bone started to talk. His threshold of pain erupted from a churning pop from the socket. He hoisted his neck and bawled mindlessly to the treetops. The world became fuzzy red grains. His mind short-circuited. In a gasping, broken voice, he cried for help. He cried for his mother and father. He cried for his grandparents. Somewhere within the collapsing halls of his consciousness, a speck of solidity knew that he was yelling, but couldn't hear anything. It was being drowned out by an amalgam of screams, child screams. They wafted from the dismal moor in a choir of mindless pleas and indiscernible moans. Come inside. Meet the family. We're all lost boys and girls here. It hurts to fight, doesn't it? Just let go. Why fight it? It jerked him ever closer to the dark green froth. Every sense of feeling left his dislocated shoulder in a numb veil. Howls of wailing children invaded his eardrums. He could gaze straight down into the moor's gullet now. No reflection stared back. Only empty space. Yes, the infinite empty space that waited for him. The darkness was coming closer. Hungry darkness. Horrific reality pitted his fleeting world. He was all alone, isolated from everyone. His parents' silhouettes waned on the horizon. You're slipping. I can feel it. The pain will stop, I promise. Aren't you tired of them hurting you? Leave your parents behind, just like they did you. Nathan's strength abandoned him. His body glided over the rim and dropped head first into the tainted fluid. Sharp chills stabbed every nerve they could reach. The water shot into his ears and nostrils. Invisible rip currents sucked him further into the void. His lungs contracted and felt like they were tearing open. Screams bubbled out of his throat. Wake up, he begged. Wake me up, please, please. The tide drew him lower into the moor's suffocating trenches. Deeper he sank from the oval-shaped twilight that shrank above him. Inevitably, everything disappeared for Nathan Keene, until all that remained was the bottom that he would never reach. The countdown commenced in Hollow Park. A group of kids, ranging from 10 to 12, scattered. Cindy frantically separated from the bulk of them. Their hysterical giggles and hushes would surely get her caught. The grey sky looked like bundles of fine lint. She formed a mental map of all the dead giveaway spots. Be it seeking or hiding, she was the best. But this time Jeremy Breyer was it, and Jeremy Breyer is a cheater. Of course, he thought the opposite was true. Every cheater always did. Mum told her so. Squinty Eyes is peeking while she counts. He whined every time it was her turn to find everyone. That was his favourite nickname for her. It used to make her cry, but has since diluted into a faint annoyance. A close second was the obnoxious reminder of what his father called her mom, Mrs. Nip. She hated every atom that boy was made of. But this time would be different. She'd wipe the floor with him. She crossed an old jeep road and circled right around 3 deep, dark throats of Savile Sink. The water used to look clear and blue, before groundwater contaminated by nitrate seeped its way through Tallahassee's loins over the years. 30, her instincts warned. Definitely reached 30 by now. Out of time. She leapt over a family of wildflowers and abandoned the trail. There was no doubt he'd try and seek her out first. The first one caught was branded the worst hider of the bunch. That was the glowing red iron Jeremy Breyer reserved with her name on it. Cheaters are the scum of the earth. None deserved even a thread of sympathy in this world. That was why her father left for Osaka when she was 3. Mum told her so. She stopped. There were bands of bright yellow in between the trees that tangled around their trunks. Police line, do not cross, was scribed in pitch capital letters. Caution tape. She'd seen it before, mostly downtown for strayed voltage warnings. Why Hollow Park, though? Curiosity overwhelmed her as she maneuvered past the barricade. The earth in front of her dipped into a round crevice. A pool that resembled tar gathered at the bottom. It was a sinkhole, but not just any run-of-the-mill sink for tourists to gawk at. No, this was the Dismal Moor. She and the others used to play here a lot, before the accident 2 years ago. The body of a 10-year-old was discovered by a hiker named Barry Moss, who'd heard the toddler's screams. By the time he arrived, the boy had reportedly fallen in and drowned. Ever since then, parents and authorities have cracked down even harder with Hollow Park's safety. Mum didn't have to know, though. Everyone else would be too chicken, especially the cheater Breyer. How could she throw away this trump card? She mindfully slid down the incline towards the dark water. Cindy knew all the stories that swashed around the Moor's lips. Lauren Hudson said it was caused by a meteorite, and that their city was built around it. Billy Bracken says a witch's house once stood here before she cast the wrong spell and caused the earth to swallow her. The fattest grape on the vine was that the sinkhole is haunted, riddled with human bones inside its limestone cavities. Remains from an old graveyard that was built over the train, before sinking into the earth and being swallowed whole, souls and all. The pit plunged so deep into the lightless shaft that no ghost could ever swim out of it. But Cindy knew they were all just flim-flam stories. She waited in the dirt and traced white creases in the stilled water. Are you hiding? Someone asked. Cindy panicked, expecting to find someone to leech her for the spot. Her monolid eyes met a small face that plopped out of the black. It was a boy that looked like a glistening sheet of white. Droplets of water sailed down his black brows and pasty cheeks to rejoin their kin. She'd never seen him in the park before. Are you hiding? Yes, I'm hiding. Are you going to rat on me? She groused at him. What do you mean? The boy looked confused, as though an invisible hand scratched his drowning hair. Shh. Cindy blew a finger against her lips. Haven't you ever heard of hide and seek before? I'm hiding. Someone else is looking. Get it? His puzzled stare lit up. Oh, I love that game. Can I play too? Cindy crossed her arms. As long as you don't cost me this spot, I don't care. But you have to be quiet. I can do that. Good, she smiled. Her voice dimmed in a whisper. My name's Cindy. What's yours? She watched the corners of his mouth turn up in an asymmetric smile. It's nice to meet you, he quietly trilled. His bluebell eyes broadened with excitement. A grim black and blue ring encasing one of them. I'm Nathan.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.